was up here, what, 5 or 6 months ago, and I did a bowl, and I stood up here, and I proudly told you guys that you folks, that there was 4 things you could do, we could all do to become better turners. And I mentioned the first one. I don't know, it probably was something like safety. I mentioned the second one, maybe sharpening your tools, developing a system to consistently sharpen your tools. And then it was blank. There was no number 3 and there was no number 4. And I didn't know what to do, so I turned and started over here to pick up some tools, and the third one came to me. I don't remember what it was tonight. And before I got back up here, I had the 4th one, you know, so I guess I got lucky. But, you know, as you do these things, you learn a little bit, and you get a little smarter about it, and you learn not to paint yourself into a corner. So if I was going to tell you what we're doing tonight, I would say we're going to turn a whatchamacallit or something like that. And there would be several things you could do to become a better turner. We could all do to be better turners. And that way you're not committed, you know. If there could be 4, there could be 5, there could be 10. Who knows? How would I know? I'm a hobbyist turner just like y'all. I do it for fun, and that's what most of us do. But tonight we're going to do a platter. We have a little bit of a time constraint, but not much. And as we go along, I'll tell you kind of what I plan to do and why I plan to do it. If you have any questions, just get my attention and ask them. But basically, when you think about it, a saucer, a plate, a platter, a bowl, they have more in common than they have not in common. And, you know, they all have a rim of some sort or another. They all have a bottom, and they all have a depression. This would, yeah. We think, you know, when we see a platter, we probably know we've seen a platter, and this would be maybe a typical one. Has a rim, it has a base, and it has a depression. When we look at this, we might think that's not a platter, and it's not. I would call it a bowl. But in many ways, it's not that. Excuse. There we go. In many ways, when you compare the height of those two, this one is about 3/4 of an inch higher than this one. So I think you could call it a platter probably, but I call it a bowl. I brought it tonight. I didn't think it was a platter. I brought it because it's the finest bowl I ever turned, and I wanted to show it to you guys again. You've probably seen that one. This is turned from a piece of pecan. This is turned from a tree that grew down in Westport. There we go. It was called the Westport oak. It was a bur oak. It was a bicentennial tree, which means in 1976, this tree was judged by those who were professional foresters to be at least 200 years old, a minimum of 200 years old. One of only a few trees of that age in Kansas City. It was chopped down probably 7-8 years ago, and it was the darndest thing. It's the only tree I ever was around that had been removed, that when you walked up to it, it was looking back at you. I mean, it was that high, laying on its side. Kind of an sort of an awe deal. It really was kind of strange. And when you start chopping on a tree like that, you don't do it with a normal chainsaw. The tree company loaned me one that was about 5 feet long, and basically works the same way. But this is from the Westport bur oak. You look at this. Is this a platter, or is this a bowl, or is this a saucer? Maybe it doesn't make any difference, but I think you could call it any of those things. I think when you get ready to do a platter, you probably basically are going to start out with a fairly seasoned blank. The reason for that is with most bowls, you're going to do a twice turn deal. You're going to do a rough turning and leave it maybe about 10% of the thickness to let it dry in that stage, and then you're going to put it back on the lathe, remount it, and you're going to do the finished turning, and you're going to go ahead and finish it up. But with a platter, you're almost starting out, depending on the type of platter that you're going to be doing, you're starting out almost at the same thickness that your first turning on a bowl would be. And so you really don't have that as a good option to rough it out and to set it aside. Basically, you're going to have a seasoned piece of wood on here. I think I brought some examples, or at least the way I would do it would be to cut my basic blank, probably to paint the entire rim or the entire surface here with some sort of wax coating to slow down the drying so that it doesn't crack, knowing full well that probably about 10% of those blanks that you do set up are going to crack. I don't know if you can see that. I think you can see it maybe better on this side. Probably this blank included some of the pith in it, or maybe it just had a fault in the wood. It cracked like in a week's time, which is kind of unusual because it had been painted here. But you have to slow down that drying somehow, or I think probably almost every one of them would crack to some extent, maybe some of them worse than that. Well, normally around here you want to shoot for about a 10 to 12% moisture content. And so you can measure that one of two ways. If you have a moisture meter, that's the best way probably. If you don't have that, then you can just weigh the blank when you put it up, and then continue to weigh it on a regular basis and keep track of that. And when maybe for a week or something like that, it does not lose any additional weight for some period of time, then you can assume that it's as dry as it's going to be around here. It'll never get to zero around here because of our humidity. But around 10 to 12%, you can turn that and be relatively assured that it's not going to move a great deal. At least it's not going to move because of moisture. You bet. I have 2 or 3 examples of what can happen. These were done purposely, actually, just to show you how wood will move. This was ash, the same tree as this one here, the same hunk of wood, turned and dried artificially in not to final dryness, but just dried somewhat in a microwave. And as you can see, the end grain came up, the side grain went down. You cannot see that on the TV. Maybe you can see it a little bit. You can see a little bit there. There you can see it. That tells you, one of two things. I'm not sure this is important, but it could be important to you maybe on something you're doing. You can predict where this wood was harvested from the tree by looking at the way it dries. When the side grain moves down and the end grain moves up, that means that this piece of wood was taken from the center of the tree. In other words, the center of the tree is the base of this platter when that occurs. When it moves in exactly the opposite direction, it means that, which some of these have, well, I'm not sure you can see it with them, but when it moves in exactly the opposite direction, which is not moving in the opposite direction, it's moving in the same direction, but when you put the base of the bowl or the platter or whatever it is you're turning on the outside of the log, then the side grain will cup up and the end grain will cup down. It's moved in the same direction, if you can kind of visualize that on the log. It doesn't reverse itself. It stays consistent, but you're changing the orientation of the bowl as you're harvesting it. Maybe that could be important to you, maybe in some things. Here, these were more or less final turn, but no attempt was made to dry them. It was a tree that had been left standing and dead for maybe 5 or 6 years, but just to show you, even in a situation like that, the wood is not dry. It will move. uneven drying. On this, these were actually both pieces of crotch, the fork in a tree. You can see they've moved quite dramatically, and this one has actually even cracked. This is shingle oak. It's in the red oak family. It's a shingle oak. And you can kind of see that. They have kind of a red cast to them. But just to show you that even though wood might appear, at least we might think it should be dry, it probably will not be. And then also, even in wood that is completely dried, as you begin the hollowing process and relieve tension and so forth, it's still going to move a little bit, even if it's bone dry. Anybody see my glasses? That's where I thought they were. My daughter and I were out at the tire store the other day and getting a set of tires put on her car, and there was an older fellow around the shop, and I think he just did kind of whatever needed to be done. And we talked about a number of things, the state of the world. We talked about cotton ginning down in Texas and Oklahoma and so forth. And finally that went on for about 5 or 10 minutes, and he disappeared, and then he came back and started talking to us again. And he said something that made me think about a lot of us. He says, I've got nothing to do today. But he says, luckily, I've got all day to get it done in. I thought, yeah, I've been there. Okay, this is a green blank. As I said, we normally would be turning dry. It's going to be turned. The way I turn a platter is more or less identical to the way I turn a bow to a certain extent, at least for sure as far as the way I mount it. I have a screw chuck in the chuck. It goes into the wood about 3/4 of an inch. This is screwed up on it tight, and then I bring up the tailstock. This will be the bottom of the platter. This will be the top of the platter. Once we get this completed and sanded and completely finished, then we'll take it off and we'll turn it around. Won't revisit that side again on a platter probably, unless it's just running terribly. And then we will go ahead and finish up the top. Again there, because of the way a platter is shaped, because you don't have the strength coming up to keep the thing from warping and twisting and turning, then we will turn the top in segments. We'll leave as much strength in the center of the platter as we can do. We'll leave as much wood in there to provide strength. Meanwhile, we'll turn the rim, and we'll actually finish the rim, and then we'll move on to the other parts of the platter. Finally, we will turn it back around and turn off the foot and go from there. So I think we're ready to start turning. Anybody have any questions? Or I'd hired an assistant yesterday, but to do this one step right here, because safety is so important. And, you know, this is the voice of experience standing before you. In the past, I have sanded my belly. I have sanded the fingerprints off of this hand on 3 of the fingers. Both of those injuries were in some ways superficial, but in another way very painful, and remained that way for a while. So I had hired an assistant yesterday to do the only thing here that was a little bit risky, and that was turn on my lathe for me this evening. Not that I wanted to put anybody at risk, but I was lucky enough to find an assistant that when standing before the lathe at her full height, Judy, she would be well below the firing line of anything that might come off the lathe. So, okay, here we go. Using a pull cut, we're just going to do some basic shaping. No comment. This could be done with a push cut, something like this. You can turn that gouge on over and deflect a little bit of the stuff away from you, but it seems to be kind of a nasty way to go about things. On a functional platter, I think the final foot, we're going to turn a tenon on here and the foot, but the final foot should probably be something like 50% of the diameter of the platter itself, so that it's not too tippy, so that it's more or less stable. It could be as little as 40, probably 40 to 60, so around 50% would be. Starting to turn the tenon to hold on to this thing. Size of that just depends on the size of your chuck. This is about a 14 inches, something like that. Is that 7 inches? It is. Does it look good, Carolyn? Okay. One of the things I've noticed through the years, and Mike Mahoney touched on it also, you can remove a lot of wood with the pull cut, but when you really get ready to end up with as good a surface as you're going to get off a piece of wood, then I switch around and do a push cut, and it seems like that works well for me. I'm going to spend some time making sure that the foot I'm going to grab, the tenon I'm going to grab, is as round as I can get it, as smooth and as I can get it, so that when I do switch this around, not much more work is going to be required. Hopefully no more work is going to be required. You can see, you can hear there's no tap, tap, tap with that. We're working on the foot now. Okay, we'll try for you can hear a little tap, 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 tap as I get closer to the center there. I think that's probably me rubbing the bevel too hard, and it kind of actually sets up a vibration with the tool, and it actually will chatter the work a little bit. We'll try one more time for a better cut there. If that don't work, in the interest of time, we'll. Now again, I want where the area where the jaws meet the wood right there, right here, to be as smooth and as true as it can be. So because the jaws actually are going to touch there, they will not touch back here. And that's going to give us our strongest hold. fact, you don't want them to touch. You don't want them to bottom out on the actual the bottom of the chuck. So we'll shorten that up a little bit more just to be sure. And then we'll come around and start doing a push cut. If you're going to do any decoration at all on the bottom, now's the time to do it. We'll shut that off and move our rest just a little bit closer, because we can do better than that. Sanding is not fun. Just a little shear scraping. Just a light touch. And I think with some sanding, we more or less have that. As I say, if we're going to do any decoration at all, now's the time to do it. Now's the time to do the sanding also. Sometimes I like to put a bead here or maybe a couple of beads up here. This is a tool. You can do that in a number of ways. This is a tool that I found at the swap meet out at Provo, Utah. It's a beading tool. It's made by Ashley Isles, and I've never seen it in a catalog, and I can't remember the name of that guy that brings these. He's from England. That's it. Or Fred, I'm not sure. It's one of those two. Anyway, this is the neatest beading tool I've ever seen if you like to do beads on your work. I've started seeing an Ashley Isles catalog advertised in the AAW. Whether they would be in there or not, I don't know. They come in 3 or 4 different sizes, but they cut a bead better than anything I've ever seen. Another excellent tool for bead cutting. The traditional thing, I guess, would be the skew. We'll just skip right on past that. It's a 3-point tool. If you've never used this, it's very user-friendly. I'm going to go ahead and show you how I would do these two. I watched Vic Wood one time. He was on the rim of the platter, and he had, I think, a spindle gouge. And this is a guy that turns every day and has for 20 years or more. He just takes a spindle gouge and just kind of, does this and ends up with a whole series of beads across it. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it depending on your experience as a turner. But here are 2 ways that almost anybody can do. And I have to look for simple ways. So we'll show you that, and maybe again on the front side. It's just a matter of pushing it in there. Sorby makes these, not like this, but they make a beading tool. And I found theirs. You just stick it in there and wiggle it around a little bit, literally, and that's all there is to it. Sorby's kind of chips out. This thing cuts better. I don't have any idea. It is an extremely sharp thing. Yeah. And as I say, it comes in 3 or 4 different sizes. Again, here's an excellent way to cut a bead. It's a 3-point tool. The flat surface, well, it has 3 flat surfaces, but for the cutting, the first one comes up. Just make your indentation there. Make your indentation there. And then the cut is a roll up and over and a drop of the handle. It's not impossible to get a catch with it, but it's pretty doggone hard. And as you can see, there's another bead. It's a little bit more of sharp pointed bead, but it's a bead. Okay, now we're ready to flip this thing around. This is sanded and ready for finishing, depending on what kind of finishing you're going to do. Oh, you know, if I go to 220, that's usually good enough for me. It just depends on what you want. You know, obviously, if you go to 320 or 600, it's going to be smoother. But for most of my work, around 220. Yeah, that's probably true. Your oils would soak in. You know, this is a lacquer of some sort or another, probably a spray lacquer. I have a tendency to change over time. I don't really like the built-up shiny things anymore, but most of our customers, and by that I mean the people we give this stuff to, they're going to like the shiny. But so that's what that one is. This is an oil finish. I think it's Mahoney's. It may be Watco. I prefer this kind of finish anymore. Maybe with some wax on it and then buff it, and it can look pretty nice. But those are just personal preferences. You should put the finish on there that you want to put on there, or whoever you're making it for, what you think they might enjoy the most. I don't think there's any right or wrong. And I guess, you know, it also depends on, is it really going to be used or for something? Is food going to be in it? Those kinds of things. Although I've been told that any finish is food safe after the dryers have evaporated, which, you know, somewhere around a month or something like that. That's true. Yeah, I think if you put something real wet into this lacquer finish bowl, it would have white spots on it. The kind of tenon you turn depends on the kind of chuck. You know, this is a one-way and requires a straight tenon. We got 5 minutes left. I'm going to run that up there and be sure that our jaws are resting as square as possible against the base of our eventual foot. Tighten it a little bit and then back that off a hair and go ahead and do our final tightening. And that's probably going to be tight enough. We're going to keep the tailstock up there again because that's a real safe way to turn anything until we have to take it away. Advance that just a little further and get ourselves a little more distance there. You say it smells funny? Oh, this is ash. I probably said that. That's why you always do that. Barely clear it. That's right. I spent quite a bit of time the last time I was up here. Does anybody remember what I said at all? Sweet. Sweet. Because I don't either. But I do remember I spent a lot of time on sharpening, and I think it is important that you employ a system, if you're not a freehand sharpener, that's repeatable and gives you the kinds of edges that you need. The sharpness of your tool, of course, will to a great extent determine how much sanding you're going to have to do. We're going to skinny this down a little bit, and we're also going to smooth it up. save our sharp tool for the last. These are all bow gouges. Well, not everything, but they're all sharpened with the same degree here. They vary on the sides a little bit depending on the shape of the tool steel itself. As I say, it helps to have a system that's repeatable. If you want to know more about, that's not my system, but it's one that was developed, I think, by Craft Supply and a young man out there named Kirk DeHer, who normally comes to the tool show. We may or may not see him this year, but he demonstrated it in Utah this past year. I like it. It's in an AAW magazine about a year and a half or so ago. But I think that, and there's all the information is there that you would need to replicate it if you wanted to give it a shot. And I don't know, Bud, to get to the AAW, to get to past articles, do you just go to the website and click on past articles, or? Yeah, Kirk DeHer was the fellow that authored that particular story on sharpening. All right, we're going to skinny this down a little bit more, but remember what I said. We're going to leave the bulk of that in there so that we don't get a lot of vibration. The thickness you leave these things, I think, again, is your choice. You know, obviously, if you're turning something completely green, that's one matter, but if it's dry like this, it truly is your choice. You wouldn't want to run that cut like I did up into a piece of wood that extended out much farther than that did when I made that cut. Otherwise, if you engage that whole cutting edge like that, you're probably going to get a pretty horrific catch. Ooh. I think we'll try this again. You like that? We want the bead to stand, as Norm Abrams says, a little proud of the surface. So, wow. That's a little proud of the surface. That was a spindle gouge. we would go ahead and sand this part of it at this point in time and finish any decoration we were going to do, because as we relieve the fibers in the center of this outside rim can get kind of floppy. All right. We can turn that over a little bit and deflect a lot of that away from us. See why I like the pull cut? You can get rid of a lot of wood pretty fast. That sounds kind of thin, but in my judgment, it's not. We'll see. I've got a platter down here I didn't show you. It's a piece of walnut root ball, and I turned it and went through, and so I stuck in a small piece of cherry. And I tried to turn it again, and I went through the second time. And so then I stuck this one in, and it worked. People don't know that if you don't tell them, unless they are turners. See, we're still ½ inch thick. I probably would take quite a bit more off of that, actually. Maybe what we need is more speed, Anthony. Those cuts are all the same. This point in time, we're going to back this off and move it out of our way. Turn our lathe off and readjust this for the finishing up here. Again, you can remove a lot of wood in a hurry with the pull cut. We're cutting on the left-hand side of the tools down towards the tip. You can hear that little tap, tap, tap. It could be one of two things. Poor job of turning, or the wood's beginning to move a little bit. as I say, it's difficult to come back to the rim once you leave it and relieve the pressure in here. I'm not going to keep you much longer here. Oh, 3/8. That's more than 3/8. So we're going to take a little bit more off there. Cut on that left-hand side, you just, instead of being way around here, you simply move the tool handle a little further away from you. Because the worst mistake you could make would be to engage too much of that cutting edge at one time. I don't think you could very successfully scrape a platter. Does anybody know why making platters is a lot more fun than making bowls? Anybody? You want me to tell you? Okay. There's not as much cleanup to do. Not as many shavings. That's not too good, but we're going to call that good. We're going to imagine that that's good. And I'm going to show you how I do the rest of it. If you were working with a real thin piece of wood, or maybe with any piece of wood, a lot of people would, instead of turning a tenon, would have turned a slight recess in there and would have grabbed it in an expansion way. I like to turn a tenon because I like to remove all the evidence of how it was held. And as long as the wood is free, this is something Jim Faraday showed us a while back. Piece of the, what is that, Jim? Just buffing. Is he still here? In Scotch-Brite. To hold it on a jam chuck. We're not going to have our speed up very fast here. We still have the little indentation where we had this centered before. I'm not going to run it up too tight, but we've got to run it up tight enough that we get enough friction that we can complete the turning, but not so tight that that thing breaks off. I don't know if you can see, there's a little wobble in it, but not a great deal, and you can judge that by getting your tool rest as close as you can to it and just see how the piece turns, and that's not bad. So now we're satisfied, everything's sanded. We're going to take off our tenon here. We're going to turn our speed down again. Judy. Okay. I think that's going to be fast enough for me. Just depends on what your threshold for pain is. It's easy to get a turning to this point and make a mistake. I started leaving a little bump, for lack of a better word, in the base of a lot of my flat turnings. I think I kind of like it. It's just a personal thing again. But if you do something like that, you want to be sure your bump don't stick up too far, and that don't. Just a little bit more. Right. Heads up. We're not gonna try anything fancy here. Oh, I'd say that's 3/8. If you were home in your shop and you only had yourself to worry about, and who knows, and it also depends on the condition of the piece of wood that you have as far as how you take that. And a lot of guys, not a lot of guys, I question if they do this on a regular basis, will actually kind of cut it completely off and sort of catch it. I don't do things like that. Just a little gouge to take this nubbin off. If you take off too much of it, then you got a pretty bad sanding job ahead of you. It's easier to sand it something that sticks a little proud of the surface than it is to sand something that has broken off down in there. Are there any questions at all? I think that's it, folks.